They say every scar tells a story, but has told one no one wanted to hear. And if you believe that dignity is worth more than beauty, then you'll understand what follows. So, before we begin, take a moment to like this story and subscribe, because sometimes, standing tall in a world that wants you small is the greatest act of rebellion there is. London, 1865. The year fog seemed to hang heavier over Mayfair, as though the city itself conspired to hide what it did not wish to see. And what it did not wish to see was Lady Evelyn Marchmorn. She had once been the glittering promise of her family's name, the golden-haired debutante whose laughter filled every ballroom, whose eyes, clear and steady, had been said to capture sunlight. But all that had changed one grey November afternoon when the horses bolted on the Bath road, sending her carriage tumbling into a ditch and shattering the life she'd known. When she awoke weeks later, it was not her broken ribs or the twisted wreck that haunted her, it was her reflection. Pale skin once admired in candlelight now bore a jagged reminder from cheek to collarbone, an ivory seam that no silk veil could truly disguise. The doctors called her fortunate to be alive. Society called her something else entirely. At first, they had come to call friends, acquaintances, even distant cousins, bearing flowers and practiced sympathy. But pity, she soon learned, had a half-life. It fades quickly when a woman no longer fits the painted image expected of her. By the second season after the accident, invitations dwindled. By the third, her mother's sighs grew louder, her father's patience thinner, and the mirrors in their townhouse more carefully covered. It wasn't that Evelyn lacked courage, she simply grew tired of watching herself disappear in the eyes of others. And yet, when the spring of '65 arrived with its endless chatter of new debutantes and familiar scandals, she found herself once more standing before the long mirror, brushing a hand across the faint ridge along her temple. "You attend the Montrose ball," her mother declared that morning over tea, her tone brooking no argument. "It's for the veterans, and the Marchmonts will not be absent. You will wear the blue silk, the one with a higher neckline." Evelyn had wanted to refuse. But she knew defiance was futile. A lady could not fight the world by staying home. That evening, the chandeliers of Lord Montrose's ballroom burned brighter than she remembered, each crystal droplet scattering gold over silk gowns and polished boots. Music drifted like perfume through the air, but it did little to drown the murmurs that followed her as she entered on her brother's arm. "She's come again," someone whispered behind a fan. "So brave," said another, with a kind of pity that cut deeper than cruelty. Evelyn held her chin high, the posture of a soldier marching to battle, her scars hidden beneath lace and artful curls, though she knew every glance was a wound reopening. She moved among the crowd with practiced grace, accepting polite smiles that did not reach the eyes. It was easier to pretend she did not hear. Across the room, laughter erupted near the musicians. A group of young officers in brilliant red coats stood beneath a gilded mirror, their medals gleaming like fresh blood. Among them was a man who stood slightly apart, his posture straight but his gaze distant. Even from across the room, Evelyn could sense the difference in him, not just in the way others deferred to his presence, but in the shadow that clung to him, an aura of restrained power. "That's the Duke of Wessex," whispered her brother, noticing her glance. "Sebastian Harland. Back from Crimea. The hero everyone talks about." Evelyn's heart stirred, not from attraction, but from something deeper, an unspoken recognition. Here was another marked soul, though his scars were rumored to lie beneath his immaculate gloves, hidden by the courtesy of tailoring. A man who had stared into gunfire and returned to a world that would rather not be reminded of what war truly looked like. When Lord Montrose's butler struck his staff to announce the Duke's arrival to the dance floor, the crowd shifted as if on cue, every mother positioning her daughter in the line of his view. The orchestra began the first waltz, a shimmering melody that filled the hall like sunlight on glass. Evelyn took a step back, intending to retreat to the terrace, when she felt the brush of air beside her, the subtle displacement of presence, and then heard a deep, even voice. "Forgive me, my lady. May I?" She turned. The Duke stood before her, tall, composed, his grey eyes steady but unreadable. For an instant, she thought he must have mistaken her for someone else. No one, not since the accident, had asked her to dance. "Your Grace, she began, faltering. "I fear I am not perfect," he finished quietly, his gloved hand extended. Neither am I, Lady Evelyn. Yet we both seem to be standing. The simplicity of it disarmed her. And though her pulse raced with the certainty of 100 watching eyes, she placed her hand in his. The whispers rippled through the crowd like wind over water. The scarred lady and the ruined duke. But when the music began, all she could feel was the measured rhythm of his steps, the warmth of his palm through the silk of her glove, and the startling steadiness in his gaze. For the first time in years, someone was looking at her, not past her scars, not despite them, but as if they were merely part of a story still being written. And as the waltz carried them across the marble floor, Lady Evelyn Marchmorn realized something she had long forgotten, that surviving was not the same as living, and that perhaps, just perhaps, this man who bore his own invisible wounds might teach her the difference. Evelyn told herself it had been nothing more than a dance, a polite gesture from a man too noble for his own good. But as London's gossip spread like ink in water, she could not shake the memory of his hand guiding hers, or the quiet steadiness in his gaze. The newspapers called it charity, the Duke of Wessex extending kindness to the unfortunate Lady Marchmorn. Yet something in her refused to believe it had been pity. Pity looked away. His eyes never had. Days later, their paths crossed again at the Royal Botanical Exhibition. The glass dome shimmered with heat, the air heavy with perfume from imported orchids. Evelyn had come for the sake of appearances, determined to prove she could still face the world. But when she saw him standing beside the fountain, tall and composed, something inside her faltered. He inclined his head slightly, as though he'd been expecting her. "Lady Evelyn," he said, his voice carrying through the hum of polite chatter, "London seems determined to conspire in our acquaintance." She smiled faintly. "Or perhaps your grace has a hand in the conspiracy." "If I did," he murmured, offering his arm, "it would be a cause worth the crime." They walked beneath arching palms and hanging orchids, their conversation careful at first, then daringly honest. She asked about the war, he answered with measured restraint. But when she mentioned the soldiers who never returned, his composure cracked. "I see them still," he admitted softly. "Every time I close my eyes." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he removed one of his gloves, revealing a hand crisscrossed with scars, the flesh uneven and puckered. Evelyn's breath caught, but she did not look away. He seemed almost relieved by her silence. "Fire," he said simply. "When the carriage exploded, I went back for the men trapped inside. They call it bravery. I call it memory." Her fingers moved before her thoughts did, resting lightly over his scarred hand. "Then we are alike," she said quietly. "We both carry reminders." His eyes lifted to hers, searching. "Do yours still hurt?" "Only when I forget they are there," she replied. "Only when I pretend they never were." Something in his expression shifted, admiration, perhaps, or understanding. "You speak as someone who has learned to endure." "I had no choice." "Nor did I," he said. "But endurance is not the same as peace." They lingered there, surrounded by the hum of bees and the distant laughter of the fashionable crowd. When he finally spoke again, his tone had softened. "You know, Lady Evelyn, scars have a language of their own. They speak of survival, and of strength. It's the rest of the world that insists on calling them ugly." Her lips trembled into a small, genuine smile. "Then perhaps the world should learn a new vocabulary." He smiled too, brief, real, and disarming. "Perhaps it just has." After that afternoon, London's gossip only grew. Some called it infatuation, others scandal. But neither of them seemed to care. Their meetings continued, sometimes at art exhibitions, sometimes along quiet walks in Hyde Park, each encounter deepening a bond neither dared to name. He listened when others spoke over her. He looked when others looked away. One evening, as twilight fell over the gardens, he said quietly, "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Evelyn?" She hesitated, fearing the answer. "Tell me." "I see someone the world tried to break, and failed." She looked away, but he caught her hand before she could turn. "The world mistakes survival for shame," he said, his voice roughened by feeling. "But I've learned the truth. Scars aren't what remain after the battle. They are what prove you fought it. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt the smallest flicker of peace, a fragile, luminous thing, begin to take root in the space her pain had once filled. The Duchess of Winfield's summer fete was the crowning jewel of the season, a glittering stage for gossip disguised as grace. Evelyn had not planned to attend. Yet, pride, that quiet ember in her chest, refused to let her stay hidden. She arrived beneath chandeliers that burned too brightly, her gown simple but elegant, her scars softened by candlelight. The whispers began before she had even crossed the marble floor. She came alone again. How bold! How foolish! Then the air shifted. The Duke of Wessex had arrived. Sebastian Harland, war hero, bachelor, the man who had dared to dance with the scarred lady. Conversation stilled as he entered, his presence commanding but calm. His gaze found her instantly, and everything between them, the gossip, the pity, the doubt, seemed to fall away. Without hesitation, he crossed the room, bowing with a formality that felt more like devotion than duty. "Lady Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet yet clear enough for every listening ear, "you outshine every light in this room." She tried to deflect him with grace. "You risk your reputation, your grace." "They will talk." "They already do," he replied, offering his arm. "Let us give them something worth the telling." When he led her onto the floor, the orchestra hesitated, unsure whether to play. Then the first notes of a waltz swelled, soft but steady, and together they began to move. At first, the crowd stared in stunned silence. Then came the hiss of laughter, the kind that cloaks cruelty in amusement. Someone whispered, "How noble of him, to pity the ruined lady." Sebastian stopped. The music faltered. Every sound in the room died. He turned not to the crowd but to her, his voice low but unwavering. "They call you scarred," he said. "But they mistake what scars mean." Then, before anyone could react, he took her bare hand in his, raised it slowly, and pressed his lips to the faint line that traced her wrist. "These," he said, his words carrying through the breathless hall, "are not marks of shame. They are proof of survival." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Evelyn stood frozen, tears glimmering in her eyes, not of humiliation, but of something fierce and freeing. Sebastian looked up at her, his expression tender, unguarded. "Let them look," he murmured. "Let them see what courage truly is." The orchestra began again, this time softer, reverent. He drew her close, and they danced once more, not as spectacle, but as equals. Around them, no one dared to whisper. By dawn, the story had spread across London, told in every parlor and club, but retold with awe, not scorn. "The war hero kissed the scarred lady's hand," they said, and silenced 1,000 cruel tongues. Weeks later, when they wed quietly at the Marchmorn Chapel, sunlight spilled through the stained glass like blessing. As his scarred hand closed over hers, Evelyn knew that love had not erased their pain, it had sanctified it. And so they became legend, the Duke who saw beauty in resilience, and the woman who taught him that the bravest hearts are the ones that have already been broken, and still choose to love.